A judge laughs in open court. "Pick any wife for free." And the whole room gasps when the tattooed biker points to the quiet black woman in the back and says, "I'll take the black virgin." Everyone thinks it's a joke, a cruel public stunt. But when the two strangers are forced to live under the same roof, what starts as humiliation turns into something nobody expected, a story of mercy, healing, and impossible grace. She's the town's most faithful woman. He's the man everyone calls beyond saving. And when the world turns against them both, they'll have to choose between pride and forgiveness, or lose everything. But there's one truth still buried in his past, a secret that could shatter her heart forever. Can love really redeem a man once branded by hell? Or will the town's laughter be the last thing they ever hear? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The late summer heat pressed against the courthouse windows like a living thing, making the packed room feel even smaller than it was. The old building's air conditioning wheezed and sputtered, fighting a losing battle against both the weather and the crowd's collective body heat. Wood panels gleamed dully in the afternoon light, worn smooth by generations of small-town justice. Calvin "Cage" Mercer stood at the defendant's table, his broad shoulders tense under his clean but wrinkled button-down shirt. Tattoos peeked out from beneath his collar and sleeves, reminders of a darker past that seemed to whisper accusations in the hushed courtroom. His scarred knuckles gripped the edge of the table, betraying an anxiety that his stern expression tried to hide. The room buzzed with whispered conversations and the rustle of paper fans. Local folks had packed themselves into the courthouse like sardines, drawn by the promise of drama. The air was thick with a mixture of drugstore perfumes and good old-fashioned nosiness. Judge Whitmore leaned back in his chair, his silver hair catching the light as he studied the man before him. His reading glasses sat low on his nose as he shuffled through the papers on his bench. "Well, well, Mr. Mercer," he drawled, his voice carrying easily through the packed room. "You've put us in quite the interesting situation here." The facts of the case lay spread before him. Cage had been caught speeding on Highway 31, doing nearly 90 miles per hour on his motorcycle. But before the police could catch up, he'd spotted a car wreck, a minivan wrapped around a tree, smoke pouring from its crumpled hood. Without hesitation, he'd skidded to a stop and rushed to help. "You pulled a 6-year-old girl from that burning vehicle?" Judge Whitmore continued, his tone thoughtful. "Risked your own life to save hers, then waited for the police and accepted arrest without resistance." He paused, looking over his glasses at Cage. "That's not typical behavior for someone with your colorful history." Cage shifted his weight but said nothing. His eyes, hard as steel, stayed fixed on a point somewhere above the judge's head. The judge sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of long experience. "The law says one thing, but wisdom sometimes says another. You broke the law, that's clear enough. But you also showed the kind of courage and decency that this world needs more of." A murmur rippled through the crowd. In the back of the courtroom, Naomi Brooks sat quietly, her cream-colored dress a stark contrast to the wooden pew. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, her expression serene despite the tension in the air. Judge Whitmore's face cracked into an unexpected smile. "I believe in creative sentencing, Mr. Mercer. Sometimes the usual solutions aren't the right ones." He leaned forward, his eyes twinkling with what might have been mischief. "Instead of jail time, I'm sentencing you to participate in the church's Redeem a Man rehabilitation program." Cage's jaw tightened visibly. The program was well known in the community, a chance for troubled men to turn their lives around through mentorship and community service. But the judge wasn't finished. "And to make it interesting," he added, his smile widening, "I'm adding a special condition. Pick any wife for free." The courthouse erupted in laughter, the sound bouncing off the high ceiling. Cage's expression darkened, but something made him scan the crowd. His gaze moved across the sea of faces until it locked with Naomi's warm brown eyes. Something passed between them in that moment. A recognition, perhaps, or a challenge. Without hesitation, Cage lifted his hand and pointed directly at her. "I'll take the Black Virgin," he declared, his voice cutting through the laughter like a knife. The courthouse fell silent so quickly, it was as if someone had sucked all the air from the room. Gasps and shocked whispers replaced the earlier mirth. Naomi's jaw tightened, but she didn't look away from Cage's intense stare. Then, with a grace that seemed to defy the tension in the room, Naomi rose to her feet. Her voice, when it came, was soft, but clear as a bell. "If he chose me, I'll stand by it." Judge Whitmore's amusement had faded into something more complex, concern mixed with curiosity. He studied both Cage and Naomi for a long moment before lifting his gavel. "Well," he said slowly, "this is certainly not what I expected." He brought the gavel down with a sharp crack. "But so be it. Approved." The crowd erupted into excited chatter as Naomi made her way toward the exit, her head held high despite the whispers that followed in her wake. She could feel the weight of dozens of stares on her back, could hear the barely concealed shock in their voices. The mentor? He chose the mentor? Of all people. Did you see her face? Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun beat down on the cracked sidewalk. Cage stood in the shadow of an old oak tree, pulling a crumpled pack of cigarettes from his pocket. His hands shook slightly as he lit one, the flame dancing in the humid air. He watched as Naomi emerged from the building, her cream dress glowing in the sunlight. Something about her careful dignity made him want to look away, but he couldn't. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time since his brother's death, he felt something that made his chest tight. Shame. The cigarette smoke curled up into the heavy air as he stood there, uncertain of what to do next. His choice in the courtroom had been impulsive, driven by something he couldn't name. Now, watching Naomi's straight back as she walked to her car, he wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake, or if, somehow, he'd stumbled onto the path to something he'd thought was forever out of reach. Redemption. The courthouse door creaked behind him as more people spilled out, their excited conversations filling the quiet street. But Cage barely heard them. His attention was fixed on Naomi as she unlocked her car door, her movements precise and controlled. She paused for just a moment before getting in, and though she didn't look his way, he felt the weight of her presence like a physical thing. The cigarette burned down between his fingers, forgotten, as he struggled with emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Shame, yes, but also something else. A flicker of hope so faint he almost didn't recognize it. The thought that maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for someone like him to find his way back to the light. The morning sun cast long shadows across the gravel driveway as Sheriff Tom Baker's patrol car crunched to a stop in front of the church compound. Cage sat in the back seat, his leather jacket creaking as he leaned forward to take in his new home for the foreseeable future. The small white church stood like a sentinel at the center of the property, its wooden cross reaching toward the cloudless Tennessee sky. Around it, several modest cottages dotted the well-kept grounds, their weathered paint and neat flower beds speaking of careful attention despite limited means. "End of the line, Mercer," Sheriff Baker announced, opening the back door. His hand rested casually on his gun belt, a habit rather than a threat. "Miss Brooks is expecting you." As if on cue, Naomi emerged from the parsonage, a tidy 2-story house adjacent to the church. She wore a simple blue dress today, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her face was composed, revealing nothing of what she might feel about yesterday's courthouse drama. "Good morning, Sheriff Baker," she greeted, her voice carrying the same gentle strength Cage remembered from yesterday. "Thank you for bringing Mr. Mercer." The sheriff tipped his hat. "Call if you need anything, Miss Brooks, anything at all." He shot Cage a warning look before climbing back into his cruiser. Naomi waited until the patrol car disappeared down the dusty road before addressing Cage. "If you'll follow me, I'll show you where you'll be staying." She led him along a narrow path past blooming azalea bushes to one of the smaller cottages. The morning air was already thick with humidity, and Cage could feel sweat beginning to form under his leather jacket. He watched Naomi's straight back as she walked ahead of him, noting how she seemed completely at ease despite being alone with a man who probably outweighed her by at least 100 pounds. The cottage was simple, but clean, with whitewashed walls and worn but solid furniture. A single bed occupied one corner, its metal frame gleaming dully in the morning light. A small table held a lamp and a well-used Bible, its leather cover cracked with age. The rest of the room contained just the basics: a dresser, a chair, and a small bathroom visible through an open door. "This will be your home during your time in the program," Naomi explained, her tone professional and detached. "Meals are served in the main hall at 7 a.m., noon, and 6 p.m. Cage dropped his duffel bag on the floor with a thud. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I ain't planning a honeymoon," he said with a smirk, trying to get a rise out of her. Naomi turned to face him, her expression unchanging. "I'm not your sweetheart, Mr. Mercer. I'm your assignment." Her calm response hit harder than any angry retort could have, and Cage found himself at a loss for words. She continued, as if he hadn't spoken. "There are rules here that everyone follows, including you. You'll attend Sunday service, participate in daily chores, and observe curfew at 9 p.m. She moved toward the door, then paused. "Your motorcycle can stay in the yard, but no riding it off the property without permission." Cage wanted to argue, to rebel against these restrictions, but something in Naomi's steady gaze made him hold his tongue. Instead, he just nodded, surprising himself as much as her. The day passed slowly. Cage unpacked his few possessions, prowled the boundaries of the property, and finally settled in the yard with his motorcycle. The familiar routine of maintenance gave his hands something to do, while his mind churned with thoughts he couldn't quite sort out. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the sound of hymns drifted through an open window. Cage looked up from his work to see Naomi's silhouette in her parsonage window, moving about as she hummed "Amazing Grace." The melody carried clearly in the evening air, stirring something deep in his memory, his mother's voice, perhaps, from long ago. He worked until the light faded, using his phone's flashlight to see the engine parts. Finally, with grease-stained hands and an aching back, he headed into his cottage. But sleep wouldn't come. Through his window, the church's cross was visible, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Cage lay on his narrow bed, staring at it, feeling a strange tug in his chest he couldn't name. It wasn't guilt, he was familiar enough with that. It wasn't anger, though that was an old friend too. It was something else, something that made him feel both uncomfortable and oddly peaceful at the same time. In the parsonage, Naomi knelt beside her bed, her hands clasped tightly. "Lord," she whispered into the darkness, "teach me to forgive, even when my heart trembles." Her voice caught slightly on the last words, betraying the emotion behind her calm exterior. The moonlight painted silver streaks across her face, highlighting the single tear that rolled down her cheek. the night settled over the compound like a thick blanket, wrapping the church, the cottages, and their inhabitants in its quiet embrace. In one cottage, a former biker stared at a glowing cross, while in the parsonage, a wounded heart sought strength through prayer. Between them lay a gulf of experience and pain, bridged only by the whispered hopes of redemption that echoed in the Tennessee night. The morning sun crept through the thin curtains of Cage's cottage, waking him earlier than he would have liked. His back ached from the unfamiliar mattress, a reminder that this wasn't his usual hangout with the Hells Angels. As he stretched and made his way to the door, something caught his eye. A newspaper lying on his doorstep, its pages rustling in the morning breeze. The headline hit him like a punch to the gut. "The Black Virgin and the Hells Angel, a match made in court?" Cage snatched up the paper, his jaw clenching as he read the article. The writer had turned their situation into a circus act, painting him as a dangerous criminal and Naomi as either a saint or a fool, depending on which quote you read. The words stung more than he expected, especially the ones about Naomi. Later that morning, at Mason's Diner, Naomi stood at the counter, her shopping list clutched tightly in her hand. The usual breakfast crowd filled the place with the clinking of coffee cups and the scrape of forks against plates. But another sound rose above the routine noise, whispers following Naomi like shadows. "Did you hear about the Black Virgin?" one woman stage whispered to another. "Taking in that biker from court?" "Brave woman," someone muttered. "Foolish, if you ask me," came another voice. "She's asking for trouble." Naomi's shoulders remained straight, her expression composed as she placed her order for church supplies. But Cage, watching from across the street through the diner's large window, could see the slight tremor in her hands as she counted out the money. He wasn't faring much better. As he walked through town to pick up some tools, children stopped their games to stare at his tattoos and scars. Old churchwomen clutched their purses tighter and crossed the street to avoid him. He was used to fear, even welcomed it sometimes, but something about their judgment felt different now. Back at the church compound, Naomi had set up a small table in the community room for their first scripture reading session. The Bible lay open between them, its pages crisp and intimidating. "We'll start with something simple," Naomi said, pointing to a passage. "Try reading this verse." Cage squinted at the words. "Don't need no Bible lessons," he growled, but his eyes kept returning to the text. "The program requires it," Naomi replied firmly. "Now read." Their sessions became a daily struggle. Cage would mock the passages, making crude jokes about divine intervention and heavenly justice. Naomi would correct his pronunciation patiently, ignoring his attempts to rile her up. One afternoon, dark clouds gathered outside, bringing with them the low rumble of thunder. Rain began to tap against the windows as Cage struggled through a particular verse. "Love," he started, then stopped, frowning at the words. "Love covers a—" He trailed off, frustration evident in his voice. "Multitude," Naomi supplied softly. "Love covers a multitude of sins." Cage looked up, ready with another sarcastic comment, but the words died in his throat. Naomi was staring at the page, her eyes distant. "That's the one that saved me," she said quietly, almost to herself. The thunder rolled again, closer now, but in the room, a different kind of silence fell. Cage found himself studying her face, seeing past the calm exterior to something deeper, something wounded, but healing. The rain continued through the evening, drumming against the roof of Cage's cottage. He couldn't shake the look he'd seen in Naomi's eyes when she spoke about that verse. After darkness fell, he snuck out to her parsonage with his toolbox. The porch steps had been squeaking badly. He'd noticed how she winced every time she climbed them. Working by the light of his phone, Cage carefully replaced the worn screws and added support beneath the worst spots. The rain soaked through his jacket, but he didn't stop until every step was solid and silent. The next morning, Naomi stepped out onto her porch, automatically bracing for the familiar squeak. When no sound came, she paused, testing each step carefully. A small smile touched her lips, but she said nothing as she made her way to the community room where Cage waited, pretending to be absorbed in the morning paper. The day continued as usual, but something had shifted, subtle as a change in the wind. Neither of them mentioned the steps, but both felt the weight of that unspoken act of kindness hanging in the air like the lingering scent of rain. The late afternoon sun filtered through the stained glass windows of the small church, casting colorful shadows across the worn wooden floors. Naomi arranged chairs in a circle for the weekly Bible study, a ritual that had become both comfort and challenge since she'd taken over the Redeem-A-Man program. 5 men from the program filtered in, each carrying their own stories of redemption and struggle. They nodded respectfully to Naomi, taking their seats with the careful movements of those still unsure of their welcome in such a holy place. Cage entered last, hovering near the door like a shadow. His leather jacket creaked as he leaned against the back wall, arms crossed over his chest. The fluorescent lights caught the silvery scars on his face, making them seem deeper than usual. "Mr. Mercer," Naomi said softly but firmly. "There's a chair here." She gestured to an empty seat in the circle. He shook his head. "I'm good here." "The circle's not complete without you," she insisted, her warm brown eyes holding his gaze steadily. Something in her tone made him straighten up. The other men watched as he slowly made his way to the empty chair, his boots echoing against the hardwood floor. Naomi opened her Bible, its pages well-worn from years of seeking solace within them. "Today, we're reading from John, chapter 8, she began, her voice clear and steady. "Would anyone like to start?" The room fell silent. The men shifted in their chairs, eyes downcast. "Mr. Mercer?" Naomi held out her Bible. "Would you read for us?" Cage's jaw tightened. "Not much for public speaking." "Just try," she encouraged. "Start with verse 7. He took the Bible, his calloused hands looking out of place against the delicate pages. His eyes scanned the text, and he began to read slowly, carefully. So when they continued asking him, he paused, struggling with the words. He lifted up himself and said unto them. The room waited, silent and still. "Let him who is without sin," his voice caught unexpectedly, cracking on the words, "cast the first stone." The silence that followed felt heavy with meaning. Cage's hands trembled slightly as he held the Bible, and something vulnerable flickered across his face before he could hide it. After the study ended and the men filed out, Deacon Morris cornered Naomi in the vestibule. His weathered face was creased with concern. "Sister Brooks," he began, his voice low and urgent, "I need to speak with you about this situation." Naomi straightened her cream cardigan. "Yes, Deacon?" "You're putting yourself in danger, trusting a man like that." He glanced toward the door where Cage had disappeared. "His kind doesn't change. They just get better at hiding who they really are." "Thank you for your concern," Naomi replied carefully. "But I trust in the Lord's guidance." "It's not the Lord I'm worried about," the deacon pressed. "That man's got violence written all over him. You can see it in his eyes." Naomi's expression remained gentle but firm. "I appreciate your warning, Deacon Morris, but I won't back down from this assignment." Later that evening, as darkness settled over the church grounds, Naomi noticed a light flickering in the basement. She found Cage there, surrounded by tools, working on the ancient electrical panel. "Should I be worried about electrocution?" she asked, stepping carefully down the creaky stairs. Cage didn't look up from his work. "Not likely. Used to be an engineer," Before. He trailed off, focusing on the wires in front of him. Before prison? Naomi supplied quietly. He nodded, his movements becoming more precise, almost defensive. Life has a way of going sideways fast. One day you're designing bridges, the next you're watching your little brother get lowered into the ground because some dealer sold him bad stuff. The pain in his voice was raw, unguarded. Naomi moved closer, her shoes making soft sounds against the concrete floor. I know about sideways, she said softly. My fiancé Marcus was a preacher's son. We were planning our wedding when… She took a deep breath. 3 white teenagers shot him right outside this church. They said it was a dare, just showing off with Daddy's gun. He died in my arms on these steps. Cage's hands stilled on the wires. He turned to look at her, really look at her, perhaps for the first time. How do you do it? He asked. Stay here? Help people like… He gestured to himself. Because hate doesn't heal anything, she answered simply. It just makes the wounds deeper. The repaired light flickered to life above them, casting long shadows across the basement walls. Cage wiped his hands on a rag, studying her face in the harsh fluorescent glare. You don't scare easy, do you? He said softly, almost wonderingly. Naomi met his gaze steadily. Fear's got no use where faith lives. Outside, lightning flashed through the basement windows, illuminating them both for a brief moment. 2 broken people standing in a church basement, surrounded by shadows and unspoken understanding. The morning sun cast long shadows across the church garden as Naomi knelt in the soft earth, her hands wrapped around a small trowel. She looked up at Cage, who stood awkwardly holding a packet of bean seeds. The soil needs to be just right, she explained, patting the dark earth. Not too packed, not too loose, like a comfortable bed for the seeds to rest in. Cage crouched beside her, his leather jacket creaking. Never figured I'd be playing in the dirt at my age. It's not playing, Naomi corrected gently. It's nurturing, creating life. She demonstrated how to dig the shallow trenches, carefully spacing them apart. See how the soil needs turning, breaking up the hard places? It's like that with people too. Always with the lessons, huh? Cage smirked, but his hands followed her movements, creating neat rows alongside hers. Life's full of them, if we're willing to learn. She handed him some seeds. About 2 inches deep, 6 inches apart. They worked in companionable silence, the morning birds providing a gentle soundtrack. Naomi noticed how Cage's rough hands became surprisingly gentle with the tiny seeds, treating each one with unexpected care. You know, she said, wiping sweat from her brow, these beans will need daily tending. Watering, weeding, supporting them as they grow. Like tending your soul? Cage laughed, but there was less mockery in it than usual, exactly like that. Naomi smiled, pleased he'd made the connection. Nothing good grows without careful attention. Over the next few days, Cage spent his mornings in the garden and his afternoons working on something behind the church. The rhythmic sound of sawing and hammering filled the air, but he wouldn't tell Naomi what he was building. On the 4th day, she rounded the corner of the church and stopped short. Under the sprawling oak tree stood a beautiful wooden bench, its surface smooth and gleaming in the afternoon light. A simple cross was carved into its back, the lines clean and precise. Mr. Mercer, she called, running her hand along the polished wood. Did you make this? Cage emerged from behind the tree, wiping his hands on his jeans. Figured the garden needed a proper resting place, for contemplation and such. He shrugged, trying to seem casual, but his eyes watched her reaction carefully. It's beautiful, she whispered, sitting down to test it. The wood was warm from the sun, and the height was perfect for watching the garden. You have quite a gift." "Just something I picked up in prison," he mumbled, but she could see the pride in his slight smile. They fell into a routine after that. Mornings in the garden, afternoons tending to other church duties. Cage started leaving small surprises: a repaired gate, a sharpened set of garden tools, a new bird feeder hung just where the cardinals liked to visit. One afternoon, as they were checking on the emerging bean sprouts, Naomi lost her footing on the muddy path. Before she could fall, strong arms caught her, spinning her around to steady her. She found herself pressed against Cage's chest, his heartbeat strong and rapid under her palms. Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. His hands were warm on her waist, gentle despite their strength. For a moment, the garden disappeared, and all she could see were his eyes. Not the hard eyes of the man from the courthouse, but something softer, almost vulnerable. Naomi pulled away quickly, straightening her dress with trembling hands. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Anytime," Cage replied gruffly, stepping back as if burned. That evening, Naomi knelt beside her bed, her prayer journal open before her. "Dear Lord," she wrote, her pen hesitating on the page, "I'm confused. These feelings, they're not part of the plan. He's here for rehabilitation, not—" She couldn't finish the thought. "Please grant me wisdom. Show me the right path." Outside in the growing darkness, Cage sat on the porch of his cottage, his face turned up to the star-filled sky. "Hey, Tommy," he whispered his brother's name into the night air. "You wouldn't believe where I ended up. There's this woman." He fell silent, watching a shooting star streak across the heavens. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Sunlight streamed through the oak leaves, making patterns on the new bench. Naomi paused on her way to the garden, running her fingers over the carved cross. The wood seemed to glow from within, like something holy had taken root in its grain. In the garden, the first bean sprouts were pushing through the soil, tiny green promises reaching for the light. Naomi watched as Cage carefully watered each row, his movements as reverent as any prayer she'd ever witnessed. Something was growing here, she realized. Something as tender as those spring shoots, as solid as that wooden bench. Something neither of them had planned for, but that God, in his infinite wisdom, might have planted long before they knew. The summer heat pressed down on the small town like a heavy blanket, but the real pressure came from the growing tension in people's hearts. 2 weeks had passed since Judge Whitmore's unconventional sentence, and the town seemed unable to talk about anything else. Naomi noticed the stares during her weekly grocery run. Some folks offered encouraging smiles, while others whispered behind raised hands. She kept her head high, though her heart raced every time she heard her name spoken in hushed tones. The local paper arrived early Tuesday morning. Naomi's hands trembled as she unfolded it to find another article splashed across the front page. Redemption or recklessness, the Black Virgin's dangerous gamble. She read it standing in her kitchen, coffee growing cold beside her. While some praise Naomi Brooks' courage in mentoring ex-convict Calvin Cage Mercer, others question the wisdom of allowing a former Hell's Angel such intimate access to our community's respected church program. Sources close to the situation express concern over Ms. Brooks's judgment. The words blurred as tears threatened. She blinked them away, refusing to let them fall. That afternoon, Pastor Matthews called her into his office. "The publicity has had an unexpected effect," he said, gesturing to a stack of envelopes. "Donations are pouring in. People from 3 states over have heard about our program. They're calling it a modern-day parable." Naomi managed a small smile. "At least some good is coming from all this attention." But not all attention was positive. The first letter appeared on Thursday, slipped under her door. The words, cut from magazines and pasted in jagged lines, made her blood run cold. "Race traitor, you shame your people." She burned it in her sink and told no one. More followed. Some in envelopes, others pushed through mail slots, each one darker than the last. Naomi collected them in a box, praying over each hate-filled message before hiding them away. Then came the note nailed to her door. Cage found it first, the sound of his sharp intake of breath drawing Naomi to her porch. The paper fluttered in the morning breeze, the nail driven deep into the wood. "Traitor to your own," written in thick black marker. "Who did this?" His voice was deadly quiet. "Mr. Mercer, please." But he was already striding toward his motorcycle, his shoulders rigid with fury. Naomi ran after him, her shoes clattering on the gravel drive. "Stop! Violence won't solve anything." He paused, his back to her. "You've been getting more of these, haven't you? I've seen you burning papers in the morning." She couldn't lie. "Yes." "And you weren't going to tell me?" He turned, his eyes blazing. "You were just going to keep taking it?" "It's not your burden to bear." "The hell it isn't!" He kicked his motorcycle stand down with such force it left a dent in the gravel. "I'm the reason they're targeting you!" Before she could stop him, he roared off toward town. Naomi ran to her car, prayer spilling from her lips as she followed. She found him at May's diner, squaring off against 4 men she recognized from Sunday services. The breakfast crowd pressed against the walls, faces eager for drama. "Which one of you cowards left that note?" Cage's fists were clenched, his voice carrying over the clatter of dropped silverware. "We don't know what you're talking about," one man said, but his eyes shifted away too quickly. "Liar!" Cage stepped forward, arm drawing back. "Mr. Mercer." Naomi's voice cut through the tension. She pushed through the crowd, placing herself between Cage and the men. "This isn't the way. Move aside, Naomi." His voice was gruff, but she heard the plea in it. "No." She turned to face him fully, her back to the men who would harm her. "If you throw that punch, you prove them right. About you, about me, about everything they fear." The diner held its breath. Cage's arm trembled, still raised. Then, slowly, it lowered. "This isn't over," he growled at the men, but he let Naomi lead him outside. The drive back to the church was silent. It wasn't until they reached her porch that the dam broke. "What were you thinking?" Her voice shook. "You could have ruined everything. Your freedom, the program, all of it." "They're threatening you." He paced like a caged animal. "You expect me to just sit back and watch?" "I expect you to honor what we're trying to do here. Violence answered with violence is exactly what they want." The tears she'd been holding back all morning spilled over. "Don't you understand? They're waiting for us to fail." Cage stopped pacing. The sight of her tears seemed to drain the fight from him. "Hey," he said softly, stepping closer. "Hey now, don't cry." "I'm not crying," she lied, wiping furiously at her cheeks. "I'm angry. You're scared." He reached out as if to touch her face, then let his hand fall. "And you're right. I messed up. But Naomi?" He waited until she met his eyes. "You're the only good thing I've had to lose in a long time. I can't just watch while they hurt you." Her breath caught at his words. "Then help me prove them wrong," she whispered. "Show them that love is stronger than hate, that grace is real." The space between them seemed to crackle with unspoken things. Naomi looked away first, her heart thundering against her ribs. "We should pray," she said finally. "For peace, for understanding." Cage nodded, and for the first time since arriving at the church, he knelt without prompting. Naomi knelt beside him on the porch steps, their shoulders nearly touching. "Dear Lord," she began, her voice soft but steady, "we come before you with troubled hearts." As she prayed, their hands found each other in the space between them. His rough palm against hers sent a shiver through her body, and she felt his fingers tremble too. Neither pulled away. The morning sun warmed their bowed heads as Naomi's prayer continued, asking for protection, for wisdom, for the strength to face whatever came next. But in her heart, another prayer echoed, one too dangerous to speak aloud. "Lord, help me guard my heart against feelings I never expected to find." The old church organ had been silent for years, its pipes dusty and keys yellowed with age. But for 3 nights straight, light glowed from beneath the sanctuary door well past midnight. Inside, Cage hunched over the instrument's innards, his scarred hands moving with surprising gentleness among the delicate mechanisms. He'd noticed how Naomi's eyes lingered on the organ during services, how her fingers sometimes traced its wooden panels when she thought no one was watching. It hadn't taken much asking around to learn that her late fiancé had been the church's organist. The work suited him. Each broken part reminded him of his old life as an engineer, before grief and rage had sent him spiraling. He scrounged parts from his motorcycle toolkit, fashioned makeshift replacements from odds and ends he found in town. Sometimes, in the quiet hours, he would talk to God, not praying exactly, but asking questions, wondering if redemption could really be as simple as fixing what was broken. On the 4th morning, Naomi arrived early to prepare for the day's Bible study. The moment she opened the heavy wooden doors, music filled the air, rich, deep notes that made her freeze mid-step. "Amazing Grace" floated through the sanctuary, not perfect, but unmistakable. It had been her fiancé Marcus's favorite hymn, the one he played every Sunday morning as the congregation filed in. Her hand flew to her mouth as tears sprang to her eyes. There sat Cage at the organ, his leather jacket discarded over a pew, working the pedals with careful concentration. When he saw her, his hands stilled on the keys. "I'm still learning," he said gruffly. "The tutorials on YouTube ain't great for church organs." Naomi walked slowly toward him, her fingers trailing along the pews. "How did you—" "Found the maintenance manual in the basement. Figured if I could rebuild a Harley engine, I could handle this." He shifted uncomfortably. "Want to try it?" She sat beside him on the bench, their shoulders touching. Her fingers found the keys, trembling slightly. Then she began to sing, her voice soft and uncertain at first. "Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound." Cage joined in with the accompaniment, following her lead. As the familiar words filled the space, her voice grew stronger, soaring to the rafters where generations of prayers lingered in the wooden beams. Neither noticed the gathering crowd outside until the verse ended. Through the stained glass windows, they could see dozens of townspeople standing in the morning light, drawn by the music they hadn't heard in years. Naomi's eyes met Cage's, and something passed between them. Permission, perhaps, or understanding. She nodded slightly, and together they began again. This time, voices from outside joined in, seeping through the walls like sunshine. When the final note faded, Naomi turned to Cage. "Thank you," she whispered, and then she was in his arms, her tears dampening his shirt. He held her carefully, as though she might break, or he might wake up to find this all a dream. Word spread quickly through the small town. By Sunday morning, the church was packed to overflowing. People who hadn't attended in years squeezed into pews, their curiosity about the miracle organ and its unlikely repairman bringing them through the doors. Naomi stood before them, radiant in her cream dress, leading the congregation with a voice that no longer shook. Cage sat at the organ, his usual scowl softened into something like peace. For that morning, at least, the whispers were kind, the smiles genuine. Even the sternest deacons nodded approvingly when the music swelled. That evening, Naomi invited Cage to dinner in her small parsonage kitchen. She'd set out candles, their warm light softening the edges of things. Over simple chicken and vegetables, they talked easily for the first time. About music, about their childhoods, about the small dreams they'd once held before life turned harsh. "Marcus would have liked you," Naomi said suddenly, surprising herself. He believed in second chances. Cage's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Tell me about him." So she did, sharing stories until the candles burned low and the night pressed soft against the windows. When she laughed at a particular memory, Cage found himself mesmerized by the way the candlelight played across her face. "I should go," he said finally, though everything in him wanted to stay. At the door, Naomi touched his arm. "What you did with the organ, it helped heal something in me. In all of us, I think." He covered her hand with his own, just for a moment. "Maybe in me too." But when he returned to his cottage, a black envelope waited beneath the door. Inside, the message was simple but chilling. "You don't belong here, brother. Ride with us again, or we'll come for you." The paper trembled in his hands. He recognized the skull insignia in the corner, his old chapter of the Hells Angels. They'd found him, just as he'd finally found something worth staying for. The candlelight from Naomi's window still glowed across the yard, warm and inviting. Cage stood in the darkness between his past and what might be his future. The letter crumpled in his fist, while cicadas sang their endless summer song. The night hung heavy and thick, stars hidden behind clouds that promised rain. 2 nights after finding the threatening letter, Cage sat on his cottage steps, unable to sleep. The crickets fell silent first. Then came the rumble, not thunder but the familiar growl of Harley engines rolling down Main Street. His heart hammered against his ribs as 5 motorcycles pulled into the church parking lot, chrome glinting under the security lights. Leading them was a figure Cage knew too well: Brick Larson, president of the Iron Saints. Even in the dim light, Cage could see the skull patch on his leather cut, the same one he'd worn for 15 years before walking away. "Well, well," Brick called out, killing his engine. "Look what the Lord dragged in." Cage stood, fists clenching. "You're not welcome here, Brick." "That's no way to greet your brothers." Brick's smile was all teeth, no warmth. "Let's talk business, just you and me, like old times." Before Cage could respond, Brick jerked his head toward town. "Pete's Diner. 10 minutes. Don't make me come looking." The bikes roared to life, their thunder echoing off the church walls. Cage glanced toward Naomi's dark window, praying she hadn't heard. Then he kicked his own bike to life and followed. The diner's neon sign buzzed in the darkness, casting pink shadows across empty tables. Cage parked out back, where Brick waited alone, smoking. "You got soft," Brick said, blowing smoke. "Playing house with the preacher's pet? That ain't you, brother." "I'm not your brother anymore." Cage's voice was steel. "Say what you came to say." Brick's eyes hardened. "We need you for one last job. Armored car coming through next week. Big score." "No." "You don't get to say no." Brick flicked his cigarette away. "Not after everything we've done for you. Everything we covered up." The words hit like a punch. "What are you talking about? Your little girlfriend's dead fiancé? Marcus Williams?" Brick's laugh was cruel. "Remember County 2015? That Shiv meant for you?" The world tilted beneath Cage's feet. Of course he remembered. The prison yard, the sunlight glinting off metal, then Marcus stepping between him and the blade. He'd never known why. Never knew Marcus was Naomi's fiancé until now. He died because of our beef with the Aryan Brotherhood, Brick continued. Those white boys who shot him, they were aiming for you, brother. For us. Your debt ain't paid. Cage's vision blurred red. His hands found Brick's jacket, slamming him against the wall. You knew all this time? Easy now. Brick didn't resist. Question is, does she know? Does your Black Virgin know her man died protecting a Hell's Angel? The truth of it knocked the fight right out of Cage. He released Brick, stepping back. You ride with us next week, Brick said, straightening his jacket. Or maybe someone lets it slip. Maybe we pay a visit to that pretty little church. Your choice. No. Cage's voice was quiet but firm. I'm done with that life. Brick's smile turned dangerous. Then you'll burn with her. He walked away, leaving Cage alone with the weight of secrets pressing down like storm clouds. All night, he wrestled with the truth, with guilt, with the knowledge that his presence put Naomi in danger. By dawn, he knew what he had to do. He found her in the garden, morning sun painting her skin gold as she tended the beans they'd planted together. She smiled when she saw him, but it faded at his expression. We need to talk, he said. They sat on the bench he'd built, the carved cross between them. Words came slowly at first, then in a rush. The prison yard, Marcus's sacrifice, the gang's involvement, his own cowardice in not telling her sooner. Naomi sat very still, hands folded in her lap. When he finished, the silence stretched like years between them. You lied to me by omission, she finally said, her voice trembling. You let me love a ghost through you. Naomi, No. She stood, wrapping her arms around herself. I shared my heart with you, my memories of him. And you knew. You knew all along he died because of you. I didn't know he was yours, Cage pleaded. Not until last night. But you're right. I should have told you everything when I found out. She turned away, shoulders shaking. I need you to leave. The gang, they threatened. Please. The word was barely a whisper. Just go. Rain started falling as Cage packed his few belongings into his saddlebags. The leather jacket felt heavy as he pulled it on, like putting on an old skin he'd thought shed. His Bible, her Bible, really, he left on the cottage table. Thunder rolled as he kicked his bike to life. Through the rain, he caught a glimpse of Naomi at her window, one hand pressed to the glass. The sight nearly broke him, but he had to leave, had to draw the danger away from her. Naomi watched his taillights disappear into the storm, rain streaming down her face. Her lips moved in prayer, though her heart felt hollow. Lord, bring him home safely, or not at all. The thunder swallowed her words, and the night drew in close around the empty garden, the silent organ, and the wooden bench where love had begun to grow before truth tore it up by the roots. 3 days crawled by like shadows across the church walls. Each morning, Naomi rose before dawn, her prayers echoing in rooms that felt too large, too empty without Cage's presence. The wooden bench in the garden stood as a silent reminder, its carved cross catching the first light of day. She went through her routines mechanically. Breakfast was a lonely affair of cold toast and coffee that grew bitter in her cup. The other men in the Redeem a Man program watched her with careful eyes, their whispered conversations falling silent when she passed. Sister Brooks, one of them ventured during morning devotions, we miss hearing the organ. Naomi's fingers tightened around her Bible. The Lord provides music in many ways, she answered softly. But the truth was, she couldn't bring herself to touch the keys Cage had so lovingly repaired. Each brass pipe seemed to hold the echo of that hymn, of the moment their hearts had truly opened to each other. The church felt hollow now, like a body missing its soul. Even the sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows seemed dimmer, casting muted colors across empty pews. Naomi found herself pausing in the doorway of Cage's cottage, the air still holding traces of motor oil and leather. During Wednesday evening prayer meeting, she knelt alone in the back pew, her forehead pressed against clasped hands. "Lord," she whispered, her voice barely stirring the dust motes dancing in the fading light, "I know you command us to forgive, but this choice—" Her throat tightened. "This choice feels impossible." The silence that followed was heavy with memories. Marcus's smile, his gentle spirit, the way he'd always said forgiveness was a gift we give ourselves. Now, knowing he'd died saving Cage, the truth twisted in her chest like a knife. "I taught others about your grace," she continued, tears falling onto the worn carpet. "I counseled so many broken souls. But Lord, my own heart—" She drew a shaky breath. "My own heart can't seem to find its way through this darkness." The wooden cross on the altar stood tall in the gathering dusk, its shadow stretching toward her like an accusation. Or perhaps like an embrace. She couldn't tell anymore. Miles away, Cage huddled in his sleeping bag beneath a highway overpass, the rumble of distant trucks, his only company. 3 days of riding aimlessly, sleeping rough, had left him with a scraggly beard and hollow eyes. He'd traded his leather jacket for gas money 2 towns back, keeping only the small wooden cross he'd pried from the garden bench before leaving. The nights were the hardest. In the dark, Naomi's voice haunted him. "You let me love a ghost through you." The truth of those words cut deeper than any knife he'd known. He'd found something real, something pure in her presence, only to watch it crumble under the weight of his past. Rain started falling, a steady drum against the concrete above. Cage pulled his thin blanket tighter, remembering the warmth of the church cottage, the sound of Naomi humming hymns through the window. Sleep came in fitful bursts, broken by dreams of prison yards and Marcus's face, now so clearly carrying echoes of Naomi's gentle features. The cry pierced through his troubled sleep like a bell. High-pitched, frightened, a child's voice carried on the wind. Cage sat up, instantly alert, his years on the road having taught him to distinguish real distress from imagination. There, about 50 yards down the highway shoulder, a minivan with its hazard lights blinking weakly. Another cry, followed by a woman's soothing voice trying to calm the child. Something about the scene sent warning signals through Cage's body. He was on his feet before conscious thought took over, jogging toward the vehicle. The beam of his flashlight revealed a young mother trying to comfort a sobbing toddler, while an older child peered anxiously through the rear window. "Ma'am?" Cage called out, keeping his distance to avoid frightening them further. "You folks need help?" The woman turned, relief and wariness warring on her face. "Our engine just died. I've called for help, but—" The ground trembled. Cage's eyes snapped to the curve in the road, where the glare of headlights suddenly blazed against the rain. The roar of a diesel engine grew louder, and with horrible clarity, he saw what was about to happen. The semi-truck was moving too fast for the wet conditions. The driver, probably fighting fatigue, had drifted onto the shoulder. The minivan's hazard lights were nearly dead, barely visible in the downpour. Time seemed to slow. Cage's body moved without thought, powered by the same instinct that had made him pull that child from the burning car months ago. "Get out!" he shouted, already reaching for the van's door. "Everyone out now!" The mother's eyes widened as she too heard the approaching truck. She grabbed her toddler while Cage yanked open the back door, practically lifting the older child out. The truck's horn blared, a desperate warning as the driver finally saw them. Cage planted his feet against the van's frame and pushed with everything he had, trying to angle the vehicle off the shoulder. The mother and children stumbled down the small embankment, away from the road. Metal groaned under his hands. The semi's brakes screamed, the world filled with blinding light. Cage gave one final heave, feeling something snap in his leg as he threw himself clear. The impact came with a sound like thunder, the truck clipping the van's rear end and sending it spinning. Pain exploded through Cage's body as he rolled down the embankment. When he finally came to rest, the world was a blur of flashing lights and distant voices. His leg burned like fire, and he could taste blood in his mouth. Somewhere above, he heard the mother's voice. "Oh God, he saved us! Someone call an ambulance!" Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Cage's hand fumbled at his shirt pocket, fingers closing around the small wooden cross. Through the haze of pain, he managed a weak smile. "Guess I ain't finished learning yet," he murmured, and then the darkness took him. Rain continued to fall, washing blood into the soil. The cross remained clutched in his hand, its rough edges pressed against his palm, a small piece of grace holding on through the storm. The church office was quiet except for the soft patter of rain against the windows. Naomi sat at her desk, Bible open but unread, her thoughts far away. 3 days had stretched like an eternity since Cage's departure. The empty cottage across the yard stood as a constant reminder of his absence, its darkness matching the hollow feeling in her chest. The phone's sharp ring cut through her reverie, making her jump. She reached for it, expecting another reporter seeking commentary on the failed experiment. "Ms. Brooks?" An unfamiliar voice spoke. "This is Mercy General Hospital. We have a patient named Calvin Mercer. He's been asking for you." The world seemed to tilt. "Is he—" She couldn't finish the question. "He's stable but in rough shape. Broken leg, multiple contusions. He saved a family from a highway accident." Of course he did, Naomi thought, her heart clenching. Even running away, he couldn't stop being the man God was shaping him to be. Rain pelted her windshield as she drove, her Bible secure in her lap like an anchor. The hospital corridors seemed endless, their fluorescent lights harsh against her tired eyes. A nurse led her to room 312, pausing at the door. "He's been in and out of consciousness," the nurse explained softly. "The pain medication makes him drift, but he keeps saying your name." Naomi stepped into the room and froze. Cage lay still against white sheets, his strong frame looking somehow smaller under bandages and bruises. His leg was elevated in a cast, and monitors beeped steadily beside him. The sight broke something inside her. She moved to his bedside, sinking into the chair there. His hand lay palm up on the blanket, and she noticed something clutched in it, the small wooden cross from her garden bench. Tears welled in her eyes as she gently took his other hand. "Oh, Calvin," she whispered, using his real name for the first time. "What am I going to do with you?" His eyes fluttered open, glazed with fever and medication. "Naomi?" His voice was rough, barely audible. "You came." "Of course I came." She squeezed his hand, feeling its warmth, too warm. The fever worried her. "You were right," he murmured, struggling to focus on her face. "Grace ain't cheap. It costs everything." His words slurred slightly. "Had to learn it the hard way. Always do." "Shh," she soothed, reaching to brush damp hair from his forehead. "Rest now. I'm not going anywhere." His eyes closed again, but his grip on her hand tightened. "Kept seeing your face," he mumbled. "Every mile away. Couldn't outrun it." Naomi opened her Bible with her free hand, letting it fall to a familiar passage. Through the night, she read softly, pausing only to wipe tears or adjust the cool cloth on his forehead. She prayed continuously, her words mixing with scripture, until they became one continuous plea for healing. The night staff came and went, offering coffee and gentle suggestions that she go home. She declined each time, maintaining her vigil. Outside the window, rain continued to fall, a steady rhythm underneath her prayers. Near dawn, she felt the change. His hand cooled in hers, the fever breaking at last. The first rays of sunlight began to peek through the window, painting the room in soft gold. Without thinking, she began to sing, the same hymn he had played for her on the restored organ, but this time it was for him. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. His eyes opened, clearer now. He watched her sing, a look of wonder on his bruised face. When she finished, silence filled the room. Not the heavy silence of their goodbye, but something lighter, full of possibility. "That was always my favorite," he said softly. "I know." She smiled through tears. "You played it for me, remember?" Seemed fitting. He looked down at their joined hands. "Naomi, we have time," she interrupted gently. "Time to talk, time to heal, time to let grace do its work." He nodded, tension easing from his shoulders. Outside, the rain had stopped, and morning light streamed through the window, warming them both. The small wooden cross lay between their clasped hands, no longer a symbol of what was lost, but of what could be found again. 3 weeks after the accident, sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of First Baptist Church, casting rainbow patterns across the wooden pews. The morning paper lay folded on countless laps, its bold headline catching the light. "Hell's Angel saves family, faith wins." Mary Beth Wilson, the reporter who had once mocked their story, had written a different kind of piece this time. She detailed how Calvin Cage Mercer had pushed a minivan containing a mother and 2 children to safety, seconds before an 18-wheeler would have crushed them all. The article painted him not as a menace, but as a hero, a man transformed by faith and love. The church was packed to overflowing, with people standing in the back and along the walls. Even Judge Whitmore sat in the front row, his weather-worn hat held respectfully in his lap. His eyes twinkled with satisfaction, as if his unconventional sentence had worked exactly as planned. Cage sat near the front, leaning on his newly carved oak cane. He'd worked on it during his recovery, carefully shaping the wood from the same tree that shaded their bench. The handle bore the same cross design he'd carved months ago, a reminder of where this journey began. Naomi stood at the pulpit, her cream dress catching the morning light. Her voice, steady and clear, carried to every corner of the sanctuary. "Love isn't just a feeling," she began. "It's a choice we make every day. When Calvin Mercer first pointed at me in that courtroom, I chose to trust God's plan. When I learned the painful truth about his connection to my past, I chose to let God handle my hurt. And now," she turned to face Cage directly, "I choose to forgive, completely and publicly." Cage's hands tightened on his cane, his eyes never leaving her face. "The same God who brought healing to my heart brought transformation to this man's life," Naomi continued, "and in doing so, he brought justice too." She pulled out an envelope, the one Cage had hidden away before his departure. Inside was detailed evidence of Brick, Larson's criminal activities, including the truth behind several unsolved crimes. The police had acted swiftly, arresting Brick and his core group just days ago. "The Iron Saints won't threaten anyone else," Naomi said firmly. "Their reign of fear is over." Judge Whitmore nodded approvingly, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The congregation sat in respectful silence, many wiping away tears. After the service, People lingered, sharing coffee and conversation. The divisions that had once split the town seemed to be healing, much like Cage's leg. Old church ladies who had once whispered in judgment now offered him homemade cookies. Children who had hidden from him now asked to see his cool cane tricks. Outside, the old oak tree cast dappled shadows across their bench, where Cage and Naomi sat together, watching their community transform. The wooden cross on the bench's back matched the one on his cane, symbols of a journey neither had expected, but both now treasured. Autumn painted the Tennessee hills in shades of gold and crimson as sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of First Baptist Church. The morning air held the crisp promise of change, much like the transformation that had touched everyone gathered within those sacred walls. Naomi Brooks stood in the small anteroom, smoothing the folds of her simple white dress. No elaborate lace or beading adorned the fabric, just clean lines that spoke of the pure heart within. Her dark eyes shone with unshed tears as she adjusted the small bouquet of wildflowers gathered from their garden. Through the door, she could hear the gentle murmur of the congregation settling into their seats. These were the same people who had once whispered and stared, now coming together to witness a miracle of grace. In the sanctuary, Calvin Cage Mercer stood beside the altar, his hands trembling slightly as they gripped his polished oak cane. Gone were the leather jacket and unkempt beard. In their place, a crisp black suit and clean-shaven face reflected the man he'd become. His eyes never left the closed doors through which his bride would enter. Judge Whitmore stood at the pulpit, his usual gruff demeanor softened by the occasion. Who would have thought his courtroom jest would lead to this moment? His eyes crinkled with satisfaction as he shuffled his notes, preparing to officiate a ceremony born from his own unorthodox sentence. The first notes of the wedding march floated from the rebuilt organ, its pipes gleaming in the morning light. The congregation rose as one, not with mockery as they had that first day in court, but with reverence and joy. Many dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs, moved by the visible evidence of God's redemptive power. Naomi appeared in the doorway, radiant in her simplicity. She carried herself with the same quiet dignity that had first caught Cage's attention, but now her face shone with unconcealed happiness. Each step down the aisle marked the distance between past pain and present joy. Cage's breath caught in his throat as she approached. His fingers tightened around the cane he'd carved during his recovery. The same wood, the same cross pattern that marked their special bench outside. Each step had been a step toward this moment. When she reached him, their eyes met in a look that spoke volumes. Here stood two people who had found healing in the most unexpected place, in each other's broken places. Judge Whitmore cleared his throat and began the ceremony, his deep voice carrying to every corner of the sanctuary. He spoke of divine intervention disguised as human folly, of love that sees past surfaces to the heart beneath. When the time came for rings, Cage's hand steadied. As he slipped the simple gold band onto Naomi's finger, he whispered words meant only for her. "You saw something in me no mirror ever did." Naomi's voice was equally soft, but clear as crystal as she replied, "Grace isn't about seeing what's there. It's about seeing what could be." Their kiss was gentle, reverent, a seal on promises spoken and unspoken. As their lips met, the morning sun burst through the stained glass in a symphony of color, bathing them in rainbow light. The choir began to sing their hymn, the same one that had once brought them together over a repaired organ. The music swelled, carrying through the open doors and over the hills, as if nature itself celebrated their union. The organ's restored pipes filled the air with notes of jubilation, each tone a testament to broken things made beautiful. Outside, their bench waited beneath the oak tree, its carved cross catching the morning light. That simple piece of wood had witnessed their journey from strangers to soulmates, from judgment to grace, from brokenness to wholeness. It stood as a testament to love that dared to see beyond appearances and faith that refused to surrender to fear. And so they began their new life together, surrounded by a community that had learned its own lessons about judgment and mercy, about seeing with the heart instead of the eyes, about the power of grace to transform lives when given the chance to work its quiet miracles. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.